let's get started. So my name is Ulyana, and I am the communications specialist at the NC CASC. And just a couple of weeks ago, I attended the Voices for Science program, like a training opportunity with the American Geophysical Union. So I'm a new Voice for Science, which is a really cool opportunity to get a lot more training and passing that training along to folks not only here at the NC CASC, but beyond. So I'm contributing a couple of workshops today. So this is split into 2 hours. I'm going to keep an eye on the time and give you a little bit of a break if you've signed up for both. But kind of the layout here is the first hour is about the art of science storytelling. How can we as scientists really tell the story of our research in a way that really engages with the public? And then the second half from 11 to noon, that's all about, I've kind of focused it in more on science filmmaking, taking you through kind of the nuts and bolts of what it takes to do that, what it looks like, and again, how to connect with your audience. And just a word about this picture here. So I always like to use things, I can't see my arrow, or my mouse rather. I always like to use really like compelling photographs when speaking on different topics. For example, I use this photo for extreme science, and this is a volcanic eruption that I actually witnessed in Mexico. Popocatépetl erupted while we were guiding a dormant volcano nearby. So it kind of captures people's attention already. What is the story behind that? So the way I could start that is talking about how we were all gathered in this cabin when all of a sudden my ears just popped and I felt shaking in the cabin we were staying at. And even the windows rattled. We're like, what just happened? And going outside and seeing this cloud, just plume of ash coming. So that kind of draws people into what I'm going to talk about as far as the science. So I just wanted to put a note here on visual communication. We'll let that go. And the point here is that we started, as kids, everything is about the visual, right? Everything's about kind of the art that takes on different forms. And that's what guided our expression. Nowadays, we have word processors, right, that we're using. We have spreadsheets. All those are necessary components, right, as scientists. But when we're trying to communicate, the visual really draws the eye more to get your story across. And so this cartoon was actually made by Olivia. She's one of the folks who's in charge of the Voices for Science program at AGU. And she does these illustrations, which are really cool and to the point. And I think a lot of us will relate to this. And my background before coming on as a communication specialist is as a geologist and glaciologist actually at CU Boulder. So I have my PhD in that. So I come with an understanding of the science, and then the job now is translating that science into ways that people can understand. And so here's the sad reality when it comes to presentations is that really everyone does forget even things that have been said in minutes prior. And no one really is listening. People might be on their computer right now doing other things, checking their phone. It's just the reality of what we're facing. And the fact is that after a month of a presentation, people only retain about 25% of what they heard. And that 25% oftentimes is tied to some kind of comic like this or some kind of image that really spoke to someone. So you can use this though to strategize how you're going to communicate your science. And also science shows that after about 10 minutes, that's when attention really starts to wane. So what can we do to combat this? Knowing something about humanity and human nature, what can we actually do to tackle this? And so this does apply for in-person as well as virtual. And so you can split up your presentation into these 10-minute segments knowing this. So for 30 minutes, 3 segments, for 1 hour talk, 6 segments. And that might seem intimidating at first, like what are we actually going to do? Like how do we do that? And so here's some ideas for that. And I call these segment switches. Okay, so after about 10 minutes, if you want to be transitioning and into some data or talking about some of your findings, you can tell an anecdote about how that data was collected, for example, if you're working in the field. You can stop and ask for questions. In a virtual thing here, I see that my chat is lit up. So I could always click that and just see like who's saying what or who's asking some questions. Jane, is there anything, because I can't actually click on the chat?
No, just comments about the cartoon.
Okay, nice. Or then also doing some kind of activity. So in person, obviously, you're not going to be getting up for 6 segments to do some kind of activity and get up and stretch kind of thing. This is only for like longer kinds of segments. But as far as virtual, we have these breakout room options that we can do. And then we'll be doing that in the next section when we're doing the science filmmaking. And then there's also other virtual platforms you can use. There's a lot of them out there. Today we'll be using Padlet. I don't know if anyone has used that before, but it's just a way, really simple way for us to share, kind of like almost like sticky notes, but virtually, where you can share ideas. So there's ways for people to get actively involved. So there's multiple things you can do for segment switches, but just keeping in mind how the attention does wane. All right, so one of the first things to do when you're trying to craft a presentation is knowing your audience. So demographics obviously are a great start, but connecting with your audience means understanding them on a more personal level. So taking a walk in their shoes, describing what their life looks like. So there's an exercise that's been done in other science communication workshops where you actually will role play a person, and the scientist has to talk to that person depending on who they are and what they connect with. So to just give you an example of what that looks like here. So farmers, right? So we at the NC CASC, we're dealing with the North Central region, and farming is obviously changing a lot due to climate change. You know, they're going to suffer a lot. There's going to have to be adaptations that are made. This is what these people are most interested in. So I'm probably not going to talk about polar bears to them, right? And so really connecting and understanding what your audience is really interested in. And in some cases, if you know you're going to be putting on, for example, a workshop, you can gauge people's interest by even doing surveys beforehand for participants and finding out what do they want to get out of your presentation, because the presentation shouldn't be about you, it's about what you can teach them. So this leads into why is your audience there? What do you think? Oh, let me just minimize so I can see. What do they think that they're going to get out of this presentation? What's that kind of expectation? And there are techniques where you can kind of lead with your conclusions, like, here's what we found out, like, and then we're going to tell you the story of how we got to that point. And so people already kind of have an idea from the beginning. All right, this is the result, but let's see the story, that process, and then reinforcing those results at the end. Why did they come to hear you? Right, that's another thing. And are they willing participants, or are they mandatory attendees? There's something to be said about a captive audience, right? And so this is also a bit of a situation analysis. If people are paying to come to a talk, normally they're really interested, they want to get something out of it, otherwise they wouldn't spend the money. So give them what they want to. And I don't mean we all have to be entertainers, but we should be storytellers. And then also, what do you want them to do? Right, so answering the question, so what? I always like to think about when I'm giving a talk or structuring something, it's like, so what? Why should people care about this? And it doesn't matter if it's not something big picture. You should always try to tie it back to a big picture. But sometimes that just doesn't happen. Sometimes the findings that you're presenting on are smaller scale, but you always try to answer, so what? What do we do with this? Make sure there's clear understanding and or action for your audience to take. And you can do this with every type of talk. And so the exercise that we're going to do with Padlet will kind of get you thinking about what this looks like in 3 parts. So there's a template for this. So writing down a word or 2 that you want to use in defining your why. I want to do what? So you have all these different options here. And so these are only some of the possibilities. For example, today I want to educate you on the different types of techniques you can use for science storytelling. Obviously, an hour is not going to be enough time to do this. We need multi-day, full-day workshops to go through all this. But part of my work with Voices for Science will be providing these types of webinars for crafting presentations and communicating your science. But this is just to think about define your why before you even start crafting your presentation. And then writing down a sentence defining your objective and your action, and being prepared to share that. So I want to do this on the left side here. Sorry, I can't point for some reason on this computer. Your objective, what do you want to do? So that my audience will do this specific call to action. For example, today is Earth Day, right? So maybe we want to bring to light people's attention about this is Earth Day. So we want them to understand, we want them to acknowledge it, we want them to subscribe to our Twitter, and things like that. These are specific calls to action. And the other thing is we have, and Jane, there's the link there for creating QR codes, right? So one of the things we should be conscious of now, especially in the time of climate change, is reducing our waste, right? And so what are ways that we can get materials to audiences? People vary, right, in how they prefer to receive. Some are much better at looking at things, some are much better at listening. So this can include everything from setup of the room. Like if you have a smaller type of workshop and you want people to be more kind of in a round table, organizing the room matters too. And then the availability of materials after the presentation. In our case with Climate Solutions Days, we're providing these recordings, right? So everyone can access them after the fact. And then something that's become really popular are these QR codes. So this blog shows you how to go about creating one of these codes. And so this is just a quick way for someone to use their phone to scan that code and get access to the materials that way. And speaking of which, all right, we're going to take our little break now here. So you can scan this QR code, which will take us, will take you to the Padlet, or Jane will put a link in the chat. So you can do either if you want to still see the screen here and do this on the phone, or if you want to do it on your computer. But here's the prompt. Think of a specific presentation, paper, post, or whatever that you have coming up. Step one on the Padlet is to figure out and tell us who is your target audience. Now the Padlets, let me just show you here, let me pull it up. The Padlets are anonymous. My name's on there because this is my Padlet, but you can add here a feature, and then you can put your name or in a photo if you want to introduce yourself, but we're going to share who is your target audience. I'm just really interested in what kinds of audiences people are interested in working with. So let's just take a few minutes to do this. And you'll see that there's 3 parts here. So we're just focusing on who is your target audience first. And let's see if this actually works. So I don't see anything coming up yet. Can we, let me just see.
I see them coming up.
Yeah,
Oh,
I see them too.
yep,
They're,
me too.
we've all just responded, the ones that have, and we're showing up as anonymous.
There we go.
There we go. Okay.
Oh, as comments. Oh, I see. Yeah, and if you want, you can also use this button here to post. Sorry, I didn't see that. Okay, so we have grassland managers, we have government authority, land managers and scientists, natural and cultural resource managers, more land managers and stakeholders, data science teachers. So yes, all of these are really specific target audiences. And in some cases, you can still use the art of science storytelling here. And one thing I want to clarify is that when we're talking about science storytelling, it's not about dumbing down or numbing down is the other phrase. It is simply about connecting on that. We tell stories as human beings. That's what we've done since a really long time throughout our history. And so this is something that just really resonates with people. So when we do the next step of defining your why, this is what I'll ask you to add right here. Let me just show this. There's the publish button. And you see you can, there's lots of things. Padlet is a great tool too. So let's just take the opportunity to chat about Padlet. You can upload things, pictures, put links in, search for images within this. Let's just publish it. So this will show up as a separate block. Nice. Oh, very beautiful photo. Great. Yeah, and so this is actually a nice tool that I like to use also when I've taught classes in the past too. If people want to remain anonymous, that's one great way where people are free to share. And then there's ways where people can like stuff, right? You can put likes and you can also make comments, as you guys saw here. Agency managers, I see, is a new one here too. Yeah, so the next step then will be to define the why, but we're going to get to that after a few more slides. I see some writing, so I'm going to wait just a minute here. And if I may ask, if you want to add to this, not only who is your target audience, but if you don't mind sharing, what type of presentation are you looking to give? Is it going to be a lecture, in person, virtual? If you don't mind sharing, what if you have a specific what you have coming up, because that would also help. And again, you can do it as an add a comment or add it as a button here as well. I see lots of people writing. Maybe I have to refresh also. Okay, training and workshops, great. So for the person that just wrote about workshops, so this is something I just came across. So I don't have input on how well it works yet, but I do want to share it. Let me see what else we have right in here. Information about current snowpack. Nice, beautiful. That's really timely, absolutely. No. Reporting in writing and presenting, okay. Let me quickly share this. Okay, so I just, like I said, I just recently came across this, but this just looks brilliant. I'm really excited to share this. So they're called PIP decks. Okay, so if you're trying to create a workshop, I'm going to show you, they have these workshop tactics. It's a deck of cards, but instead of having a physical deck of cards, I just ordered the digital version of it. And so they have read the workshop strategy system card to determine which tactic, read the suggestions at the bottom of each card, follow the steps. Okay, so they have some strategies about, do you clearly know what your team is working towards? Do you know the biggest problem? Are you able to articulate it clearly? And once you figure that out, they tell you which deck to use. And I have the decks here. Let me just randomly pick one. Build a discussion agenda together. Keep track of what's being discussed and what needs to be discussed. So here's the front of the card, and this tells you the recommended time to do it. And then the back has some other details on what it looks like. So again, these are called PIP decks, P-I-P. I just recently came across this, and I think they've done a really good job of putting together a lot of hard work into a deck. And then there's the storytelling ones also. Okay, so there's a storytelling deck here that tells you the different techniques also. So let me just scroll here, pick a card, any card. And then they show you, here's the story building system. Do you know why you need it? Do you know where to find it? What's your role? What does your story need to do and how to plan it? And then again, and you can go in and see some of the cards here. Let's just look at conflicts. It's not opening. There we go. Show how your work helps people with life's great battles. Conflict drives your story because we want to know how it resolves. Okay, so there's one. And then the back of that card talks about Hollywood as well. And it tells you about the 3 different conflicts: hero against nature, hero against society, hero against self. And so again, these are really just neat ways to use these kinds of prompts when you're trying to craft what type of story you want to tell, as well as in some cases with what kind of workshop you want to be building. All right, let me have a look at our Padlet. Handouts. Yes, handouts are great for synthesizing results and very big on visuals as well. Presentations on climate change impacts to broad audiences. Yes, that's a big one, and a challenge, especially when you go broad. Okay, so let's go back to the presentation. Let me see if it'll replay from this spot. Okay, good. Okay. So the other thing here is to think about what is the message. A list of facts won't be retained, but they're needed, right? That's the conundrum here, is that we need to be presenting facts, but who's going to really remember a lot of that stuff? And the other point is, we're not simply telling a story. We may contain story as an emotional connection to a message, to be able to engage with people and for them to retain. A narrative needs to be compelling and memorable. So this picture here, you might be already thinking, like, what's going on here? I see some Spanish written with maybe some altitude and injury. So I was actually on a science expedition in a remote part of Chile on a volcano. This was about 5 years ago when I slipped and fell about a 45-degree angle and tumbled for about 500 feet. And so if I want to talk about what kind of research we were up to in Chile, I would start with the time I almost died. And you're like, what? And then there's your lead in. Now, everything obviously can't be that dramatic because you want things to be true. But there's ways, again, to really capture attention. And so that story deck, those cards I was telling you about, kind of really guide you into how you can create it. Here's the thing. Storytelling is not easy, even though we do it constantly in everyday life. When you're doing it for science, it's actually really hard. This presentation, these 2 sets of presentations have taken me weeks to try to perfect and figure out how I'm going to communicate these things, because it's such a process. So don't get frustrated with it when it does take a while. And here's the other thing about the science. There have been some studies done. This is from the Hassan Lab. If you are interested, there's hassanlab.com. They're using fMRI studies. They're looking at brains with speakers and listeners and looking for, well, what is the actual science behind when people are telling stories versus when they're just talking about facts. And so their results indicate during successful communication, both speaker and listener brains have a coupled response. So there is actually something that happens as far as the connection point in the brain. And that's the point you want to get to, is to connect and see the same eye to eye. Then there's also this paper that was done identifying the essential elements. So if you're interested in this paper here, they go a lot more into depth about the essential elements of this. And big picture here, effective science communication frequently uses these tools of storytelling. So when you're crafting slides, how does this look like? So there's something I like to call the power of visuals. So my PhD was looking at glacial changes in the Himalaya, how this has happened through time. So there was back in the day when they were climbing Everest for the very first time, right? The Mallory expedition, 1921, 22 and onwards, they were taking a lot of photographs because they were doing reconnaissance for climbing. But then it turns out we have this beautiful archive of photos that now we can see how things have changed over time. So this is the north side of Everest, and the glacier that's flowing off of it is called the Main Rongbuk. And so this was what it looked like in 1921. And then one of the mentors I worked with on my PhD, he went back in 2008 and took another photo. Okay, so it was the same season. But then you can see, let me just go back again. You see how much snow is lost, snow and ice is lost at the top of the mountain, and what actually happens to the glacier. And again, it's hard to tell scale, right? Especially in photographs. You're like, I have no idea, like, how big of a change I'm seeing. I can visually see, for example, on Everest, but then using these special laser range finding binoculars and other ground points in GPS, we're able to decipher just how much drop there was vertically of this glacier. And so depending on the audiences, you can use meters and feet. The latest talk I gave was in feet, so I just kept it as such. So there's the power of scale. Other photographs, if you can put yourself in, geologists, we know this, we're always putting something for scale, pens and other things in our photos, but if you can make it interesting, compelling as well, a person in a shot. And then the power of analogy, right? So here's some numbers, 216, 312 feet. I still can't quite understand how big that is. And so again, if I'm speaking in the US, I might use the Statue of Liberty, right? The Statue of Liberty is 305 feet. A lot of people may have seen it, or well, they know it, of course, but may have seen it and be like, oh, okay, wow. Now I have a sense for in that time frame, in less than 100 years, just how much vertical loss there is of that ice. So there's the power of analogy as well. And then I did a map comparison that showed the same glacier that you just saw visually. I'm comparing 3 different maps, and you can see, and sorry, I can't point with my mouse here, but basically the black line that you see there is where the glacier was really thick back in the 20s, and then where it was just 40 years later. So there's this deflation, right? And so here's what I say, here's the volume loss. What the heck does that mean, right? So for scientists, it's important when we're sharing our results among scientists for numbers and whatnot. But if you want to translate this into the public, then you can figure out different volumes and how that translates. And that turned out to be 400,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Right, so when this presentation was given, it was around the time of the Olympics. So again, it was connecting with something people might be already engaging with in media. And therefore they're like, oh, okay, I know what that size looks like. Wow, that's a lot. Okay, so again, for the public, a lot of times these numbers just don't mean anything, maybe even to us. But then when you have this kind of analogy, and this can be easily done. In the next session, I'll talk about a really cool online tool that can help you with actually figuring out what they call social math. All right. So now that we have the audience, knowing your audience, the next step is now defining your why. What do you want to do? So we're going to do it again. What is your message on Padlet? So I'm going to go back to Padlet. So let's do step 2 now. So again, if you already made yourself a little block here, just add, where did it go? Maybe it's behind. Yes. Okay. Oh, nice. Yes. Thanks for the pipstick thing. There it is. So yeah, if you want to go ahead and add now, defining your why. And I'm going to just have up.
Ulyana, there was also a comment in the chat about a link to the paper when you were talking about storytelling. You had a title and I didn't catch it. I'm happy to go search for it, or we can send it out later as a resource.
Sorry, I did not. Yeah, I will have it out later.
So
sorry
we can
about
send that
that
out after.
Yes. Oh, funny. We have a comment here about someone kept referring to cubic kilometers, and somebody wanted to know, what is that in acre feet? Yes, acre feet for water managers. Again, that's knowing your audience, knowing what they know. For us, it's like, I don't know acre feet, like it doesn't mean anything, but your audience. This is why, yes, very good point, Becky, about knowing who you're speaking with. So I'm putting this up just so you have these words here. So the next step here again is defining your why. So go ahead and add that to your Padlet. Again, you don't need to use these. You can come up with whatever you want, but just I want to blank based on what you already wrote. And if it helps, maybe just take a screenshot of this because I'm going to have the Padlet up here shortly. Oh, nice. So under this one, natural and cultural resource managers and climate change adaptation strategies, I want to collaborate and inspire. Excellent. Let me look for other. promote interest in science. Absolutely. Yep. Science blog writing. Excellent. Oh, very cool. Thanks for sharing that with the infographics. Yes. If I can make that bigger, curious. Fire behaving differently in different forest types. Yes. I'll be talking about that in the next session, but infographics, yes, very important. A lot of people respond well to those as well. Respond to an expressed need, yep, from manager partners. Increase awareness to motivate actions. Yes, absolutely. And then I would take that for the person who wrote about the current snowpack, increasing awareness to motivate actions, then even defining it one step further. What are going to be those specific actions? For example, when it comes to snowpack, I have an app on here, which Mountain Hub for measuring snow depth. So this is my action because I'm a mountaineer as well. I go out and I make these measurements. So maybe we can share an app that people can use to contribute to citizen science, for example. We can define that a bit further. Provide climate info to support decision making. Yes. Connect audiences to climate data and information. Yes, exactly. So what are the tools? For example, we've been hearing throughout Climate Solutions days about the different kinds of tools that the NC CASC has come out with. The Climate Futures Toolbox, for example, and just going on right now is about a drought and what are the kind of the drought tools. So there are lots of tools out there. And so one of the things we're interested as a CASC is also creating trainings, like how do you actually use these tools? We have so many great things, but it's only powerful when it's being used. Right. And then add nuance here to understanding about fire regimes. Yes, this is a very specific one. Excellent. Very specific action and bringing attention to change. Great. Okay, so we'll keep going then. Okay. All right. So one of the things when we're thinking about building slides. So my husband loves science, but he's a musician and a mountain guide. And so I always run things by him. And when I ran by this one by him, it's like, you tried to find Waldo, didn't you? He's like, yes. And so that's the thing about busy slides is when you have lots of stuff going on the screen, lots of data and other things popping up, people might fixate on that one thing and completely ignore what you're saying. So really trying to think about crafting slides as well, you know, like, or if you do need to have busy slides, like you want to put a lot in one, just animate it, right? So just animate things one at a time as well, again, and seeing where the eye will be guided. And then when creating slides, okay, so I'm a Star Wars fan here, so I have to throw that in. And there's Yoda and R2-D2 there too. So what do we do when we're creating these slides? All right, so what are the do's? All right, so stay concise, right? Again, even if you have an hour-long talk, again, we can do these segments, like you see how I'm breaking it up with these palette things and kind of breaking up the flow of things, but staying concise and then using stories and anecdotes as appropriate. And then being direct as well. Like, I want you to do this at the end of the talk, or these are our conclusions. This is what we found. Okay, so then what about the do nots? Overdo the special effects like I'm doing right now. Just reading the slides like I'm doing right now. And overusing statistics, right? So statistics, again, and data, that's what we do. We're scientists. But at the same time, there's ways that you can present that in a way that's really interesting, like the folks who were commenting on the infographics, right? Like that's one great way where you can have a visual kind of impact where statistics are built into it, but you're not overwhelming people with lots of data and charts, which oftentimes people will just turn off of it. I used a lot of time-lapse photography in my research. I mean, there's data associated to like glacial lakes going up and down and volume changing and, you know, and graphs changing, but no one really understood the graphs. But as soon as I showed them the image of these lakes draining and flooding and changing, that resonated. Okay, so there's ways, again, you can make these data visualizations happen as well. So speaking of presenting data, telling the truth, nothing commands like credibility, right? And so even if you're saying, hey, this was the null result, null hypothesis or whatever, just tell the truth. Don't cherry pick, because oftentimes that's what the media is doing, obviously, and then get into trouble there. Being prepared to provide access to the entire data set. So I just put GitHub here. Folks are probably maybe familiar with this. It's a development platform. That's where Ty, if you've attended his talk earlier in the week, a lot of code can be shared there too. And so oftentimes when we are publishing a manuscript, there's more data than we can present, right? So if someone is interested making entire data sets in a place where it's much easier to be able to share, GitHub is one tool just that I know. You might have others that you have. And then being ready to answer questions about your conclusions. I always have, and this probably applies to a lot of you, slides on standby, right? If you get asked this, then you're ready with this. So just being ready and anticipating what kinds of questions could be asked. Okay, so to communicate that data effectively, you must first articulate the conclusions you want your audience to adopt as well, right? So this is just something from marketing, but I thought it was a good one. So it looks at sales drivers through the 4 quarters. So the first impression you get is that this, wow, look at that enormous sales growth and recovery from quarter 1 to quarter 4. But in fact, the person's point in the presentation was to draw attention just to quarter 2. They didn't care about the growth after. They really wanted to fixate on what happened during that time period. And so again, you can present data as raw data as is, but then you can have people focus on a certain point, saying, look, I want to discuss this. This is the main point of it. Okay, so kind of guiding people, right, as to what you want them to focus on. That's not cherry picking. That's just, again, that's guiding them. And picking the right tool, right? Knowing when to use what. Pie charts, right? Will work only for showing these large differences in proportion. Bar charts, visually more precise, can accommodate larger data sets. You can stack them. Sometimes 3D makes things stand out, but sometimes it just detracts. So again, knowing when to use what types. And there's a book called Presentation Zen, actually called Presentation Zen. That's another really good resource. And then if you want to highlight what's important, using contrast. Okay, so you can have different kinds of backgrounds, and then you have your data, and then there's emphasis, right? So again, draw the eye to the information that's most critical to your message. So contrast really works there, but just being aware of other things like color blindness, potential soul. So trying to see like that we're being accommodating to how things are presented as well. And then when it comes to those calls to action during a presentation, using powerful imagery. So this is, I made a video that talks about the future of fire. And so this type of image really speaks. If you see like, whoa, what happened here? And this is from Louisville, from the Marshall Fire that happened at the end of December, that rare winter wildfire. And so powerful imagery to be like, look, we don't want this to happen. Look at that house right behind the one that was destroyed. You know, like this evokes a powerful kind of emotion as well, especially for us here in Colorado who went through that. But yeah, you can use powerful imagery to really get that message across. And we'll talk more about imagery during the filmmaking session that's coming up next. And then yes, compelling visuals, like the example that someone gave on the Padlet about these types of infographics. And this kind of stuff can also be sourced out, right? And so there are graphic designers out there. I have created a few like simple graphics for people who have needed it, but there's so many people that specialize in this in particular. So if you're doing something on a larger scale or want to communicate, for example, to agencies or governments, it might be a good idea to actually get someone as a graphic designer to help you come up with these kinds of infographics. Because again, the attention span at different levels could be really short. And so you have to be able to convey your message pretty quickly about, like, all right, what am I trying to tell? And the visuals is what's going to drive that. And then for maximum impact, also being able to illustrate statistics. And so talking about like all right, how many people die a year from shark attacks? Because people are always afraid of sharks when those news stories come out, but in reality, it's only 10 people a year versus humans killing other humans, and mosquitoes, right? Mosquitoes, like in all the diseases that they bring. So these types of statistics you really want to include, but if you just list out the facts, it's not going to be very interesting or compelling for someone looking at it. And so instead, you can come up with these kinds of infographics, and you can just Google science infographics depending on ones that you want to use, and or again, creating your own. And then also for maximum impact, using your own actual photos. They might not be as exciting, right? But you can have a story connected to it. So this is a photo I took from my condo last summer. They were saying that we had tornado warnings in Westminster, Broomfield counties. I'm like, what? We never get those kinds of warnings out here. And I go outside and I see these nasty looking clouds and hail. You can see some of the hail coming down on the photo there. And so again, if you have your own photos that might not look like much or that exciting, but you have a story associated with and saying, I was there, this is what I witnessed, I heard about this on the news, I went outside and wow, look, yeah, it does look like a tornado could hit. So again, using any actual photos you have from the field, that can help you connect with your audience. And here's one thing I want you to remember also, that your research is a contribution to science. And your explanation a gift, right? And so let's think about the best ways that we can be doing this and connecting with people, because again, it's about our audiences and what they're going to get out of presentations, what they're going to get out of infographics to evoke change, right? Ultimately, that is what we're trying to do, is get them to do something. So the last thing we're going to do here before we take a little bit of a break is our final call to action. Okay, so we've identified the target audience. We've identified what you want to do. And now what's going to be the call to action. So again, you can use the QR code there. And then I'm going to leave this up just for a minute here. So if you want to take a screenshot of this or just look, this gives specific calls to action as well. So you can use some of these or you can use your own, obviously, but let's just finish out with specific calls to action based on what you already wrote on the Padlet. Sorry, Becky, I left before you found Waldo, I think. I'm just looking at the comments here on the chat.
I did not find him, but that's okay.
Well, all right. You know what? During the break, I will leave that up. All right. So I'm going to go to the Padlet now and just refresh here. All right. So determining your call to action. So for those who have already written some of this, let's just take it one step further. Like here, bringing attention to change. How can I actually do that? Or I want to increase awareness to motivate actions. How? What does that look like for you when it comes? Because this is a really critical one, snowpack, right? Like this, people are really interested in this from different perspectives. So how do you actually do that? So I'm just having you take it one step further than this. It's like, let's get something out of this. Let's figure out what we can actually do. So yeah, we'll take a few minutes to do that and chat, and then we'll take a short break. And also questions. So while you're working on this, if you've had questions that come up, please feel free. Nice. Yes. Contacting political representative. Great. Yeah, because people really do respond to tangibles, right? Like if you tell them specifically, all right, here's one thing you can do, you're much more likely to get them to do that. Use this app, use this tool. Here's how you use it. So let's think about that in terms of what you're working on. Better plan for the changes. Yep. Great. And then here, what did I just see? So we're going to have a 5-minute break between before we move on to the science filmmaking. So I want to take about 5 minutes now to answer questions you may have on any specifics or anything even that you're working on in particular. And you can pop them in the chat or you can come off mute.
Hey, Ulyana, it's Brecken. Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. Do you have any online resources that are go-to for you with regard to, I guess, just some of the things that you've been talking about? I feel like science communication, it's definitely still growing and it's getting larger, which is great, but it's something that I sometimes struggle to find answers to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of information out there. And so I didn't manage to pull out my book, but Jane did put a link in the chat to Presentation Zen. So that book, if you see that in the chat, that's a great one. And then let me stop. Can you see me? Can you actually see me or not?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about this in the next section, but I love this book. So Randy Olson is a scientist turned filmmaker. And so this one is his newest book out, Houston, We Have a Narrative, and also talking about Hollywood and how Hollywood, despite, you know, all the bad science movies that come out of it, actually some of their techniques can guide the science storytelling. And so it talks here about why science needs a story and the different tools, like the and, but, therefore narrative, which we'll just touch on next. And then 1 second, I might have it right here. Yes. This one was where I started. Don't Be Such a Scientist. It's also by Randy Olson. So one of his first books. It's really good. So it talks all about, here, let me just through. One of the chapters is don't be such a poor storyteller. Don't be so unlikable. Be the voice of science. And so he talks a little bit here about just general science communication, and he uses Carl Sagan, obviously, of just what a good example Carl Sagan is. So if you haven't seen Cosmos, I definitely recommend looking at the style that Carl Sagan uses. But yeah, as far as books, this one is a good starting one about like just more about like why we need it. And then this one is more about kind of techniques. And then the other thing I really like are these pip decks. The pip decks are just, they give you already a lot of they've done a lot of the hard work, and they give you guidelines. Let me just share it one more time here. On storytelling and workshops. And I think workshops is pretty relevant to this group. So let's just really look at this one again. Here's the strategy system. So you can go through this flow chart here and figure out where you land, and then use the set of cards that help you then articulate things better. So hopefully those three there, Brecken, are good for like actual tangibles, things that we use. And then there's a whole other one on science filmmaking, which I'll talk about in the next section, like another book specifically on science filmmaking.
That is great. Thank you so much.
Oh, yes. And Jane, you're welcome. Yes. Alan Alda's, if I understood you, would I have this look on my face? Yes. Alan Alda has actually, sometimes they have just 1 or 2 day workshops. So Alan Alda, what's the name of it again, Jane? Center for, if you could put that link.
Communicating Science. It's with the Stony Brook Institute. Yeah. I was very fortunate to participate in a 3-day intensive with a larger group. It's quite costly, but if you're a part of an organization that allows you to sign yourself up, it was really worthwhile. And we took a climate change focus as well on that.
Yes, great. And I see that Jennifer put that up there. So just, yes, Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science. And I myself also have done one of the workshops. They have in-person ones, which are really costly, which I never got a chance to do. But during the pandemic, there was an opportunity to join virtually for just a day. That was much more affordable, really cool. So they did breakout rooms and kind of like interactive things. So yeah, that's definitely something worth checking out.
I see a comment from Emma Custer about adult education practices. Wanted to draw his attention to, and then Heather had a question about and, but, and therefore, about
Nope,
using that
it's
as
not a question.
strategy.
I was just reiterating
is
the
more of a-
Randy Olson thing was awesome.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, exactly. So just, I feel like I'm at a book reading now, but all right. So the and, but, therefore, so he has multiple sections in this book for the Houston narrative. Science is stuck in a narrative world. And so there's the and part, the humanities ought to help, but the humanities are useless for this. Therefore, Hollywood to the rescue. I mean, he's really bold. Randy's really bold. So it's quite interesting. And then here's another one. Science needs story. And there's the and part. Hollywood can help, but narrative training requires a different mindset. Therefore, I recommend something called story circles. It tells you the page number for that and what that technique is. Let's see if this will show up or not. Just kind of a technique of how to start building a narrative. So yeah, I think there's so many resources, but again, distilling what to use. And so I have, again, these go-tos, and I think the tangibles that are most useful include those decks, because if you're short on time and you don't really know how to do this, right, techniques, it's a whole other their art form to it. Those decks are really great for just kind of guiding your thinking. Like I said, I only discovered them this week and I've already been playing with them. So like, this is so cool. These are the kinds of like tangibles I've been looking for different scenarios. So, and then yes, there's a comment from Emma, currently taking some classes on adult education. Excellent, great. Yes, education and communication absolutely should work together. We'll chat more about this during science filmmaking, just a bit more about storytelling before we dive into kind of nuts and bolts of how do you actually go about it if you want to create a little bit of a science film, which I think, it seems really intimidating at the start. And I'm not a filmmaker. I just like dabbling in film. And I think it's a great way to communicate your science in a different way where people can get to know you, right, as a scientist, or if you take on a more kind of serious documentary tone that can convey information with very powerful visuals. So yeah, let's take a few minute break. And then Jane, we'll start probably just 2 minutes past 11 to give people time to transition.